This is the eLearn podcast. If you're passionate about the future of learning, you're in the right place. The expert guests on this show provide insights into the latest strategies, practices, and technologies for creating killer online learning outcomes. My name's Ladek, and I'm your host from OpenLMS. The eLearn podcast is sponsored by eLearn Magazine, your go-to resource for all things online learning. Click-by-click how-to articles, the latest in EdTech, a spotlight on successful outcomes and trends in the marketplace. Subscribe today and never miss a post at elearnmagazine.com. And OpenLMS, a company leveraging open source software to deliver a highly effective, customized, and engaging learning experience for schools, universities, companies, and governments around the world since 2005. Learn more at openlms.net. Hi there, I'm Ladek. This episode is part of a live, real-time series that I recorded at the 2022 EDUCAUSE conference in Denver, Colorado. In this conversation, I speak with Clancy and Michael Kubit about the research they're undertaking in the area of digital inclusion and why giving devices to students might not always be the right choice. And just a quick reminder, you can make sure to never miss an episode of the podcast by subscribing at elearnmagazine.com. Now, I give you Michael and Ann.
We're back here at EDUCAUSE Live. We're here with not only Michael Kubit, but we brought his colleague, Ann Clancy, as well, which I apologize that your name is not on the screen. It's my faux pas. I take full responsibility for it. Both of you are with T-Mobile. But what I'm going to find really, I find really fascinating about this conversation that we're about to have is that yesterday, I had on the show a group of individuals from California State University System who are raving about their increasing, their program on providing devices to individuals to increase, to basically
their success program.
Yeah, about how do we reduce this digital divide? Yep. How do we give access to people, etc. Your conversation is really interesting as well, though. It's let's have a conversation about what those devices mean. How do we make this as successful as possible, and what challenges exist around it? Before we dive into the real hoop, so Michael, can you just, by the way, everyone, I'm a little embarrassed because I gave away one of my lapel mics. So Kim, if you're out there, can you please bring my microphone back because it's still stuck to your lapel somewhere. But that will reappear. So I'm going to hand you the mic. Introduce yourself. Tell us where you came from, what you're doing at T-Mobile right now, and what are the research that you look at in this?
Sure. Michael Kubit. I'm with T-Mobile now, actually just a little shy of 2 years, so October 31st to be there. Prior to that, I spent 35 years in higher education. Most recently, I was the Vice President for IT, Chief Information Officer at Penn State.
Okay.
Prior to Penn State, I was at Case Western Reserve in Cleveland, Ohio, as their Deputy CIO. My role at T-Mobile, and Ann and I work really, as colleagues. She really handles sort of one side of the U.S. and I handle the other side. But it's really to help T-Mobile develop a strategy for higher education. We'll talk more about this, but that's really what's led us to this digital equity conversation, really looking at sort of connected devices for students.
Thanks. So I'm Ann Clancy, and I've been with T-Mobile for just a year and a half. Michael and I are the only two in this role, and I come from higher ed space as well. I spent 14 years as tenured faculty and most recently as Vice President of Academic and Student Affairs, sitting in the provost seat at City Colleges of Chicago. My personal passion is access and equity. Working in a community college system, I saw a lot of students who didn't have the resources that they needed to be successful. Interesting thing is, before coming to T-Mobile, I didn't consider digital equity as part of that. I really looked at, housing and food insecurities and mental health and health resources, but never really considered the access to technology and connectivity until the pandemic. And I think I'm not the only one who can say that, right? So the pandemic, unfortunately, shed light on this issue, this really large issue of access to technology and connectivity. So that's where sort of our space comes in, and we think about how can we use the T-Mobile platform, and how can we work nationally, speaking with hundreds of colleges and universities throughout the country, assessing their challenges and coming up with solutions to help meet the solve for some of these challenges from a digital economic perspective.
Okay, all right. Well, then take me there. Why don't we just start with you? I talk pretty loud, so I hope they can hear me. Like,
Hold the mic for you.
yeah, no, thank you. So yesterday we were talking with 4 individuals from the University of California system, the California State University system, and they were raving about their digital device policy. We talked a little bit. I love that you continue to put into the equation not only the device but also the bandwidth that you need, the actual connection itself. What are you starting to research? What do you see? Like, what are the pieces of that equation that you think are important to put on the table that need further investigation?
Yep.
Think here on this problem.
Yep. So I'll piece together some of the data that we've been able to pull from what's out there. There's not a ton of research out there. We have seen from California State University Systems, EDUCAUSE did a study that was published. The CSU system did a study that was published in EDUCAUSE that basically stated students wanted devices, they wanted connectivity, they saw a need for it. And so that prompted, actually it was that study, I think, that prompted Michael and I having this discussion about how can we further this conversation. We looked at data from the Hope Institute, which is our top, that shed light on challenges and resources that students have, which is food insecurity, housing insecurity, and homelessness. 60-some% of community college students and about 40-some% of four-year university students experience food insecurity, housing insecurity, and or homelessness. That's a significant number. And if those students are experiencing those types of insecurities, imagine challenges to maintain a device and connectivity.
Mm-hmm.
Do I eat or do I pay my cell phone bill? That's a challenge that no college student should ever have to go through. So those two data, and then you put on top of it, you, charitable trusts, you put out data that showed that students and families who make less than $30,000 a year, is it? I don't have it in front of me. Don't have access to a device, a smartphone. So when we look at the Pell eligible students in the United States, that correlates about with that data.
Okay, sure.
Okay? So we know there's, again, a significant number of students who are challenged economically but don't have this.
I want to put a number that I believe, if I remember correctly, Michael, when we were having our pre-conversation a week ago or two, you said that something like 8 million students or something like that are Pell eligible that fit into this universe.
Yeah, there's approximately 16 million students in the U.S. education system. Yeah, there are approximately 8 million, more than 8 million. So it's a significant issue. When we think about the digital divide, we like to refer to it. I kind of refer to it as like it's school. Right? So there's the device, there's the connectivity, and then there's the knowledge of how to use that device. Digital literacy. Right? So how to use that device that's not only going to support your life as a student, but it's going to support your life as a digital citizen, right? As even the ability to be employable. So if you look at, one of the things we did in our presentation yesterday was looked at, World Economic Forum data on job skills. So if you look at that list, every single one of those actually require a foundation of digital literacy. So this issue that we've kind of been exposed to the pandemic is so much more than, as some have referred to it, this is a life skill. These are life skills that people are going to need to be productive citizens.
So you want to add to that? Or?
Well, from an institutional perspective, so when I think about what institutions need, based on those skills and those digital literacy skills, general education requirements, for the most part, all have outcomes that require that being able to sift through information, knowledge, critically think, and process that information. Back when institutions were built, this was all, and the library, right? This was all book. It's very different when you're processing it digitally because you have to sift through all of this information that may not be reliable or valid information points. So digital literacy versus literacy is really important. And making sure that students have that ability to have the correct devices, understanding how to use them, and sift through that is part of institutional outcomes as well. And so I think about this from my old chair where I'm always matching how are we getting to student outcomes Are we providing the resources for students to be able to meet those outcomes and how do we measure those? Having a device connectivity that is reliable in order for them to get to that point is also important for institutional resources, if that makes sense.
It does, absolutely. So one, I want to, at the risk of tying the two conversations together, so we talked about this just briefly with the California State University people yesterday about how one of the big discoveries was, oh, hey, when we give a device, we have to give training with it, right? We have to give, support. And they also talked a little bit about sort of extemporaneous support groups that were happening, student peer-to-peer groups that were happening in order to lift each other up, and who do you ask questions to? Where are they going to find solutions? Those kinds of things. So talk to me about either your presentation panel that you had. It was this morning, correct?
Yesterday.
Oh, sorry, yesterday. What was the feedback? What did people come to you with? Was this a big aha moment for a lot of people, or did people already have successes or challenges that they put on the table and wanted to discuss, or what did you find?
Yeah, I think our goal,
Let me go a little closer.
yeah, I think
you
our
have a
goal,
counterpart.
not only for yesterday's presentation, but this whole dialogue really is to bring awareness, right? This is, we really believe this approach not only provides digital equity, but it creates the opportunity for really a transformation, digital transformation. But, we actually believe that this is really a viable way to really address students and to not think about this piece of technology as a piece of technology, but as an extension of it. It's interesting. I was in Michigan, judging a hackathon back in the spring.
That's awesome.
And yeah, one of the things that we know, mental health is a huge crisis in higher education, and institutions cannot have enough professionals on staff to be able to support all the students that they need. So this group of enterprising students basically came up with an idea to do and build an app for peer-to-peer counseling, so that students could actually go through like professional training, by the professionals on staff to be able to do some crisis management. And when a student's in crisis, they basically open up the app and they're met immediately, by another peer student that sort of, has been trained in what questions to ask and what flags to raise. And they can escalate if they need to. But I thought, boy, what a brilliant way to provide sort of a support. We know, from some of the data that Ann shared earlier about, the number of college and university students that are, food insecure, housing insecure, homeless. Many of those students are first generation. They don't know where to go. They don't know how to navigate those resources. Many of them don't want to self-identify for all the reasons that folks don't want to self-identify. The technology sort of creates removes that barrier. So those resources can be placed on a device for those students, so they could actually find those resources themselves without having to go to an office or without having to identify or sort of go through, the embarrassment or the stigma that they might have received.
This is going to be one of those layman questions, right? As someone who's not involved in the research or anything like that, it seems to me like this is one of those discoveries, one of those where I'm trying to struggle with what would anybody challenge you on, right? Where would it, what is there any pushback on this or anything like that? Like, where is it coming from?
Not that I want to draw light to it, but
The
but to be fair, so financing it is the largest challenge, right? So we have a budgeting model paradigm that is, we already spend so much money on students. Why would we spend more money? And this is cost prohibitive and all of those issues. But Michael and I both believe that if we look at the cost of losing a student, we don't want to tell college universities how much that costs them, but we know
especially
that
like a dropout, right? Because you invest everything to bring them in, you onboard, it's just like an employer. You onboard them, and then when they leave, that's all gone.
It's upwards of $1 million if they lose a student with a high-end institution. So if you provide a resource that extends the campus to them, provides resources to them, how much more likely are? I would love to do a study on this. We have a little bit of data, and I'll share that with you in a second. So the financing piece is one of it. The other is obviously the pushback of, well, our students already outcome devices. Okay, yeah, but right, we have data that shows that they're not always reliable. Sometimes they're old and they can't handle the software that is needed in order for them to be successful in classes. And what about the students who really can't or don't have a device? Maybe those students are in the periphery and we don't see them, but they're there.
I would also just think the recruiting opportunity. This is something I've been speaking with a lot of people where how many students are not choosing even to apply or considering, especially at the community college level or the state level, because they're like, look, I can't keep up anyway.
Well, there's a recent article that came out that showed that, was it like a third or a half of community college students dropped out during the pandemic because they didn't have reliable connectivity devices to do their work.
Because they couldn't go to a lab, they couldn't, get the resources on campus. Those kinds of things.
In my school, we had students literally sitting in the parking lot on their phones trying to do their work.
Yeah, I've heard that story several times. Yeah.
So,
go ahead.
So the challenges. So that was one piece, and then the final one is, student privacy, right? So students are afraid. They have their own devices. They don't want something because they don't want us to monitor them and things like that. Well, that's a whole nother conversation about the data that schools collect on students and not, and what privacy is and all of that. But the intent here is not to monitor students' behavior, and so I think that could be socialized, and I think that could be overcome. And those are the ones I've heard. I don't know if Michael's heard any.
Yeah, I think broadly is, we've never done it that way before, right? And so it's just the ability to introduce change, right, in an industry, if I could use that term, that is not really known to be very active, right? So, but I think one of the things, is to really think about this, as a digital transformation. This enables new business models. Things that we could do to engage students that we've never been able to do before. So, we were talking to some security professionals earlier. So, one of the things that we know is that the risk profile for every university went up exponentially during the pandemic when everybody went home and started their license. So that's a huge threat. That's a huge expense to every university. How many universities have been shut down, right, because of ransomware? I think the other part of this, we talked about like student engagement and monitoring retention, and you have to sort of make that balance of student privacy. But it's interesting. I think it's kind of a generational conversation, and those folks in our generation are more concerned about the privacy than the students are, because they sort of live on the internet, right? And even a device, you can select whether you make it that they should wear or not. So we were chatting like with the use case earlier. So say you have a device, and that device essentially knows your schedule and knows, all right, I should be in these 5 classes these times a week. And so say you're, and it's essentially collecting a 1 and 0. Are you there or not, right, when you're supposed to? So a student reads the midterm and say they get a D on their midterm. They're first generation, they're really not sure where to turn. It gives, the college or university the opportunity for a planned intervention, where it's like, okay, you got a D on your midterm, but you miss class half the time. You have to go to class, right, to be successful. I mean, just, that kind of reminder. Some folks may feel that's intrusive, but, I think it's part of the conversation. I think the other aspect of this is thinking about, the push messaging and really extend that campus experience. So even to the point of being able to push advertising, tasteful advertising out to students. They're sort of used to it in all the platforms they're on now. But now because the Sun becomes a revenue generator for the university to offset what would historically just be seen as an expense.
Thanks. I just wanted to add and go back to the piece about the data and thinking about understanding where students are and how successful they are or not, and from a standpoint of, again, my brain always thinks about outcomes and creating interventions to ensure that students are successful. And if you have data that shows, this sort of goes this point back, students who stay on campus during midterm week are more likely to do well and pass their midterms or finals than those who don't. You can create a program to entice students to stay on campus, right? But if you don't have those data, then you don't know how to do that. And those are the types of things that the student success folks would love to have and to be able to do. And it also goes along with, when we are, and I always think about accreditation because that's a really big part of academic and student success. Is you have an ability to identify a challenge or a problem and then create an intervention and monitor the outcomes. The data that's available because of having the devices that are able to collect that data is going to be really impactful in the future. And Michael, you mentioned the word intrusive. One of the high impact practices that we use in student services is intrusive advising. I mean, it's actually called intrusive advising because there are many students who really need that high touch advising. So being a bit intrusive, especially in that, it's kind of important. You know, they're young adults who need a little bit of that product.
I don't know, maybe I'm old school. I have as much gray hair as you, you know, and so I find that interesting because the university system came out of the mentoring model, and the mentoring model is mimic me and do what I'm going to tell you what to do, and I'm going to start to mold you, and yet we've flipped that conversation in that, you know, hey, don't tell me what I'm going to do. Like, no, I'm going to forge my own path, and yet, you know, when I've seen learners in my life that I've worked with, some of them do much better when they have direction, when it's spelled out, when it's specific, those kinds of. Of course, there's always a few souls that really, you know, look, that you need to let them go because that's a rarity. I feel like it's a rarity rather than the norm. And then I just want to offer as well. I mean, you guys both work for a large corporation, T-Mobile. Again, I was speaking with the California State people as well, which I feel like there's a huge branding, you know, device or platform adoption opportunity for any of these organizations. You know, for any small university or community college to go out and say, look, partner with us, give our students devices, and guess what? You know, they're yours for however long until they figured out some other thing. But that's a tried and true model. You don't see that out there?
So again, we're pretty new to this space. We've been here we've been in this space Michael started 2 years ago. So he kind of started as a lone ranger, gathering information and talking to schools. I came on 6 months-ish after him. So a year and a half plus some change, we've been in this space. So, you know, it takes a long time in higher education to kind of get adoption. But we also want to be careful and make sure that we're having the right conversation. We don't want to just come in with assumptions. So that's why we've spent a lot of time talking with colleges and universities. But we did work with one community college in Tennessee, Monroe State Community College, and we did sort of a joint program where we provided free devices to students, and the college paid for the connectivity for all of their first-year students. 2,100 devices. Wow. And actually, the data is online. You can find it. It's on Monroe State Community College. The president posted an ebook to share a little bit of the program. And the outcome of that was that the adoption was slow. Students were a little bit leery. You know, this is too good to be true. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, there's some qualitative and quantitative data that the school collected. So the students then found that it was really nice to have all of the resources because the phone included, so it was a 5G phone with a 5G hotspot, and it also had preloaded resources for the students. So it had mental health resource, food and housing resources. So if the students needed to go somewhere for help, they could go to the app on the device. It had preloaded the contacts of their advisors and faculty, their LMS, their tutoring program, Khan Academy, all of the things that a student would really need to access, and it was all right there on the apps that were provided for the students. And so it was really nice because the students said qualitatively they had a phone that they were able to use just for school, and it was all of their resources, and they toggled, if they had a device to toggle the hotspot, they didn't have to worry about that with the phone. And some of the students used to use that for a lot of their work. The biggest point of this that made me really excited, and actually brought tears to my eyes when I heard the data, is that their fall to spring retention for the students who utilized the devices was a 5% increase from the year before. Now, I used to work in a community college setting. We literally had a party when we increased our retention by 0.6%. Because it's really that hard. It's hard to move the needle like that. Mm-hmm. A 5% increase in retention is humongous.
That's especially, and then if you take it to larger populations, like again, it's California State, it's 500,000 students. Yeah, if I move 5%, like that's a tremendous amount of lives, right?
Yeah, I think within the context of sort of T-Mobile, I think, as Ann shared, I think what this gives us the opportunity is really have these conversations. Right. So, and really a couple of the reasons why we're both here is that, our mission as a company is to connect our customers to their world. Mm-hmm. It's not easy for us to sort of take that and translate and say, well, the mission within higher is to connect learners to the world's knowledge. right? Which we know we're all sort of carrying around that access in our pockets every day. So that's really powerful for students to think about like how to leverage technology in a way that's really going to benefit them. And so,
May I just because I had a really powerful conversation with a gentleman named Michael Phillips, who is a professor in Australia at College of Monash University. We have a partnership with them where they're providing online education to people displaced by the Ukrainian crisis, right? I thought it was really powerful for him to put on the table. He said, look, these are savvy individuals in Ukraine. Like all I could tell me is like, access to information does not equal education. And having those curated experiences, those experiences where you're guiding, again, I want to bring it back to that, is it's just a completely different universe. And as you were saying in the very beginning, man, how do you determine what's real, what's not real? How do you determine what's a good source, what's not a good source? Like the librarian function, even if we just call it that, is really, really powerful. Sorry, I just wanted to highlight that.
That was, I think, so part of what we kind of looked at, just from the timing is, we joined mid-pandemic. So it's been interesting just to watch like what's happened in higher education. We were both in higher education for a long time, and seeing the transition through the pandemic and now having some conversations sort of post-pandemic. But I think to your earlier point, I think Ann touched on this on the notion of inclusiveness. Like the same thing is, I want to emphasize not thinking about this as a piece of technology, but really thinking about this as an extension of the people's experience. Right. And if we really want to extend this out, thinking about the future and thinking about metaversities and virtual reality, now all of a sudden that device really becomes sort of your portal, and it can be personalized to where you say not all of a sudden do you have basically that device, but your avatar sort of becomes part of that person during university. And as many of us have been looking at this technology, like augmented and virtual reality, it has the potential to be one of the most disruptive technologies that introduced into higher education.
Sure, absolutely.
Because the concepts you can teach on that platform that you can't teach really any other way. So it's not difficult to think about the extension of like this device that we carry on the market today is just what it looks like in 2022. This is going to continue to evolve into like something that comes into your glasses or contacts or wearables where we may not even be carrying phones around. Right. So thinking about that progression and what does that mean to college students?
I'd really be interested to hear or see if your research goes in this direction as well. That how do we flip the conversation from stigma to inclusion, to a part of the club? I'm not even sure what the word is there, to be included. But I'm just thinking, you walk around a campus, you see everybody is wearing the logo, everybody's got the sweatshirt on, you've got books and devices that, have the mascot. Like, again, this is me thinking in the future, but how does handing somebody their device or saying, look, you're a part of us. Like, this is a part of our bringing you in, we're saying we want you here. And that's just another way to, like, include that kind of
absolutely. That's a part of this conversation, and we haven't even gone there. Is about the online community. The online community just brought that up. There's got to be a sense, for strategic reasons for the university to have that alumni, right? Sort of power and support. But those online students are just as important to feel part of the campus and feel like they're a part of the university. And so sending a student a branded device that has a built-in community, that has an avatar, or whatever that technology is. I'm not really super tech savvy.
I don't believe that.
It's not true.
But to make sure that those students are connected, sending a device that's branded is a huge part of that, because it says, hey, listen, thanks for signing up with us. We want your education experience to be part of our university, and so therefore here's what you're going to need, and we preloaded everything. Here's your support, here's your open educational resources, which is a whole nother conversation that I think every institution should be using.
We're huge on OER. We've had lots of conversations about it.
And you can't access OER if you don't have a device and connectivity, right?
You guys get together with the OpenStax people and start talking to them.
Yeah. So here's all of this because we care about you and we want you to be successful. Knowing that a university cares about you as a student is a huge part of feeling that sense of belonging. And if you have a sense of belonging, you're going to be loyal.
And you're going to take care of the device, and you're going to show up, and you're going to take that extra effort, and you're going to bring other people in, and you're going to support the peers.
So in many ways, it's funny when we started this conversation, I kind of use the term, raising the bar, and then I kind of stop myself. It's like, no, there is no bar. We're talking about creating the bar where there is what does it mean like when every student that comes to the university, right, has the same device and the same access, as far as the connectivity. The other aspect of this is, schools are really thinking about ways to engage alumni. What if upon graduation you take that device with you, or you have that device now is available to alumni? So you think about alumni engagement, or ways to be able to connect alumni with students. We talked about this sort of peer-to-peer mentoring. Imagine the power of being able to do, like, literally have a mentor in an industry interested as a student to be able to have access.
Sure.
So there's some
mentorship path, workforce development paths, all that.
So this really enables some things that would be really difficult for a university to execute on all the myriad of devices that students come to campus with, or don't in some cases. The other aspect is, you talked about, sort of how did this get financed. I've had a couple of conversations just within the last month of, universities that are spending millions of dollars to put Wi-Fi in their parking lots in a northern climate.
Sure.
With this assumption that, the students are basically going to go to their car because we don't have adequate sort of connectivity or devices for that. Not only is that not equitable access, it's like, that's not really good, just thinking about like sitting in class in 20-degree weather. So what if that $2 or $3 million was actually invested in connected devices, right, where those students can actually access their learning anywhere, not have to worry about coming to the parking lot or going to the McDonald's parking lot or whatever to be able to have access to Wi-Fi.
Because learning happens everywhere.
Right. Well, not only learning happens everywhere, but just when you put it so starkly like that, again, you don't want to call out anyone, but it's like, well, why would you put the money there when you could have spent either the same amount or a fraction of it?
Shift. It is a paradigm shift.
Well, you got to stop thinking of the campus as a place.
Exactly.
Well, right? Yes, that and I think there are a lot of IT leaders that pride themselves on their ability to blanket the campus with Wi-Fi coverage. So as a former CIO, though, what I would say, and I'm sure it's probably not very popular, is that the strength of your network has nothing to do with the core mission. The core mission of the institution is graduating students and creating knowledge. And so I would challenge CIOs and other IT leaders to really think about this. And this is where I think T-Mobile as a company comes in. This is where we can partner. So that way, you're not spending so much money on things that are not mission critical, and you're really sort of partnering with a company. If we can run a national network, it probably help your campus, right? And I think given many schools are experiencing the increase in enrollment. We talked about the financial implications of that. Every school is sort of experiencing increases in operational costs, anywhere from 10 to 20%. So regardless of what's happening with that school, whether they've gotten back to their enrollment numbers or not, they have some real financial challenges. So and those technologies like Wi-Fi or email or compute storage, those are commodity technologies, and vendors that are here at the show are really here to partner and to help universities really offset some of those operational costs so that the resources that the universities do have can be reinvested in something that's critical. But we actually believe that connected device is more closely connected to the core mission of the institution than a lot of the IT infrastructure that's its own.
So half an hour has gone by like that, as it always does. For you, the final word, like what's the next step in your research and what you're doing, the future of those ones?
Yeah, so looking to partner with schools who are measuring the impact of providing devices to students. So we've had a couple of institutions say, we're really interested in this. There's not a lot of literature out there. What can we do together to really get some good data and research out there? I've done some qualitative research with students, asking them about their challenges. So building upon that and helping to make this conversation meaningful with those types of data as we continue to partner with schools to try to make this.
And Michael, thank you so much for stopping by today. Fascinating conversation. We really love it. I'd love to see what's going to go in the future. So I hope you'll check back in.
Sounds good.
Thanks so much.
Thanks again for joining me for the eLearn podcast. Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. Just push subscribe on your player right now. And remember, you can join the conversation live on YouTube, Facebook, and my LinkedIn feed every week. I hope to see you there. Thanks.